Alright, Eumeswil, Ernst Jünger. Third episode, I believe. Yes, third episode. And like I always do, right? First on the agenda is just to give you a context, right? So, I'm not gonna give you a context over the story again, but so far we've been really fleshing out what the anarch is in the on its own. First, in the context of subjects like history and language, but then we also um, put it in terms of, uh, I suppose, I guess the closest thing you could say is phenomena, like uh, like technology, right? How is the anarch situated in technology? So we're very abstract, right? We're very abstract. The next this chapter we're doing one chapter today, and it's the longest chapter, right? 100 books, one no 100 books, 100 pages. Sorry, yeah, 100 pages, and we definitely see the anarch situated in a more we see the anarch situated in a more real life context, right? How is he in Eumesville? How is Eumesville, and how is the anarch situated in this Eumesville? How are other people situated in Eumesville? Right? We definitely see, along with the anarch, we definitely see three main characters or three main groups of characters. Right? This would be I already mentioned the anarch, so that doesn't count. But the three other people would be um, the anarch, right? Of course, right? No story of the anarch is no the anarchist. I'm sorry. So no story of the anarch is complete without the anarchist. So there's the anarchist, and then there's the significant figures mentioned in the book. So these would be people in the story, such as the the chef, the Lebanese, I believe Kang from Chinese, his Korean wife, a lot of diversity there. And then a lot of historical figures, right? He mentions Nietzsche's Superman, compares it to Stirner on the ego in his own. He also has a few pages on crime and punishment. So, you know, like most people who's read the book, seems very all over the place. Like man, like this chapter so disorganized. But if you really think of it in terms of how is the anarch situated in Eumesville, and how is Eumesville a relationship between order and chaos, then you see that this whole chapter revolves around that topic of order and chaos. So, yeah, it's Kohei Yamamura from the Existentialist Non Grata, and today on the agenda, order and chaos is what we're going to talk about. So, this is episode 3. Are you guys there?
Yep, we're here. Let's go.
All right, let's get to it then. So definitely, it really Younger really helps us out by, even though pointing out like a lot of different groups of people, they are different, definitely in order, right? They're in a it's not the only person that's all over the place is anarch, because the anarch is compared to every type of person. But the first topic that's mentioned is order and chaos itself, right? So section 28, which is the opening section of the chapter, you get things like, I would do better to start with the night, for my day is merely its reflection. And these are the first of many hints, right? From there, you don't get a lot of indicator that it's about order and chaos. But then we move on and stand by. We move on, and then he starts to talk about how the anarch lets all this be. He can bide his time. He has his ethos, but not his morals. He recognizes lawfulness but not law. He despises rules. Whenever Essos gets into shots and shot knots, it is already corrupted. Still, it can harmonize with them, depending on the location and circumstances, briefly or at length, just as I harmonize here with the tyrant, or as long as I like. Right, so the order and chaos is subtle, not so subtle, depending on how you look at it. In either case, the anarch is definitely doing a elaborate dance, right? And with his talk on lawfulness and law, morals and ethos, there's definitely a effort, an attempt, or a drive, I should say, to be free, right? That is why he has these distinctions, right? Distinctions between ethos and morals, distinctions between law and lawfulness, and on that distinction is the dividing line between order and chaos, and on that line is freedom. That's how I definitely see it. So, right now we're only going to talk about order and chaos from a more abstract perspective, right? It's only mentioning Eumeswil as order and chaos. It's not really talking about other characters. That comes later. So, just digging up you can dig up some clues from the first sections of this chapter, or you can call out your thoughts on order and chaos and how Eumeswil relates to it. But in either case, I want to hear your thoughts on how Eumeswil is situated with what its relationship is with order and chaos.
Yeah, it's this is a very complex chapter. There's a lot going on. Like you said, this it seems very willy nilly, right? It seems where they're sort of bringing in characters and concepts everywhere, but probably structured than a first glance would give the impression of. There's a lot of new characters introduced in this chapter, reflect theme, like you said, of chaos and order, and some characters who were mentioned, just given a passing line, more depth here. I believe Colin was mentioned a long time ago, just in a brief sentence or two, and now several of them are given more. People like him are given a little bit more depth. But as to how sort of chaos and order play out in Eumesville, yeah, we're I'm just trying to find the right words to sort of capture this because it's such a big topic. I mentioned sort of off air that freedom is sort of played with quite a lot in this part. It comes up a lot, as does the anarch, and the two, of course, are connected. And it makes sense that this chapter is so heavy with both of them because they're sort of contrasted with these other ideologies that are brought out. And you mentioned that this is sort of the anarch in the real world, right? This is sort of taking it out a little bit of this the theoretical and putting it into more real context and in conflict with other people. We actually have one of the very few instances of a conversation in this book, which is very rare. It's between Dallin, I believe his name is, who is the anarchist-nihilist. He is basically a man very much out of a Dostoevsky novel. Someone who likes violence just for violence's sake. He will, if he finds, he's the kind of person who would just randomly push someone in front of a car while walking down the street. No, they wouldn't know the person, have no grudge against them. He would just do it for the sheer thrill of violence. And this, of course, comes back to haunt him later on. Such people always destroy themselves, as Martin says, and of course that comes to pass. But he's contrasted very much with the anarch, right? This is another person who has some innate sense of acting out against rule, a bit of chaos within this order. He's just smashing things for the fun of smashing things. He, even very similar to the anarch, apparently has a bunker. He has it just like Martin does. He has a bunker out in the wilderness somewhere where he does his experiments likely producing. He seems to be some kind of biologist or chemist. He's likely producing some sort of poison or some sort of. I believe he's mentioned that he produces some sort of chemical that can destroy text. It can destroy like paper and stuff, and he uses it to ruin a few meal boxes. These are very, very small acts, but kind of like the Anarch, he is trying to find a kind of freedom in this very stifled order, but he lacks a ground in history, which is a quote from the novel that Martin says, and so he just sort of acts out in these incredibly destructive ways, chaotic ways, you could say, and ultimately that chaos consumes him, and he dies in this. Spoilers, but he dies because he basically gets essentially murdered by another character, Carnax, who is a law, comes into another theme, another aspect of freedom, where we sort of get into punishment and law. I don't want to go too much into it now because I'm sure we'll get to it, but that's just a little taste, a little opening of sort of the my feelings about this chapter.
It's interesting how that Darwin, I think you said, played with drugs, because if I remember in the first chapter there was this instance of, I think, an opiator getting after death apparently. But even looking at Darwin's character as a whole, you can definitely put some sort of similarities and say he's the sort of person who is creating that, one death a night in Eumeswil that was mentioned in the first chapter. I think Darwin is supposed to represent a part of the masses of Eumeswil that lives almost, that injects chaos into the order that the Domo, Condor, and police create. So I think in the whole of Eumeswil, it's an order. There are certainly people out there to really put chaos into it. And on a small level, chaos resides, but on the large level, it's orderly.
Yeah, just to continue on with that, I think he's kind of implied to be a kind of eternal character that sort of reemerges always and everywhere, right? Anywhere where you're going to have order, you're going to have this sort of chaotic prankster character, who's sort of a Joker character, if you want to call it that, who sort of emerges and plays these kind of tricks and ultimately destroys himself. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nick Land or if any of the audience knows him, but I kind of got this strange feeling that Ernst Jünger had predicted Nick Land 30 years before he would start writing. He's kind of an accelerationist, Dallin. He kind of wants to speed up the natural decay of the state, the natural decay of society, and spin it off and get the kind of freedom that he wants, which of course he's not going to get. He'll lose all fun, the pleasure of it. Even mentions there's a point where he says he has to, if he was going to stab somebody, he'd have to stab them in the back. And Martin asks him, what's the difference? You could stab in the front, but he says quite poignantly that there is a very real difference. The difference essentially being that it's not fun, right? It's part of the hunt. You have to stab them in the back. That's where you get the thrill of the hunt and the joy of the chaotic sort of murdering someone from the shadows. So yeah, he's a very interesting character, an accelerationist, a figure of chaos, an eternal character, right? He will always, in every society, you will find people like him lurking around somewhere.
Yeah, and
if given the freedom to. No, I was just going to say, yeah, but that's of course if they're given the freedom to, which in this novel they are, of course, because the Condor and Domo are quite liberal, I believe. It's said earlier.
Yeah, they kind of are. It's very. I just before we got on this, I was reading some bits of it again, and I like the bit where the Domo is talking about chefs stealing stuff from the kitchen, and he's basically okay with it as long as he doesn't see it, right? As long as it's small enough to fit in their pockets. He says if they steal a fish, make sure I don't see the tail, and that's basically his entire ethos or whatever, his way of ruling Eumeswil, or controlling it anyways. Crime is kind of allowed as long as it doesn't cross certain lines. They don't like one of the reasons why the Carnax character, that's the one that ultimately killed Dallin, he is executed despite being a high-ranking lawyer who was actually being personally groomed by the domo for high office, presumably. He's actually executed because he used a bomb, an explosive, which sort of crosses a line that the condor and the domo can't abide by.
Hey everyone, if you listen to my brother's Karamazov, you will know that I did a voiceover after because I wasn't recorded. This is what's happening right now, but fear not, this is the only time that's happening. All the other time I believe I was recorded. Basically what I said in this part, so I wasn't being recorded right now, so I'm just gonna do a voiceover and just tell you what I was saying. Right, so everything I'm gonna say now, I've said it in the original conversation, but it's not recorded. Anyways, yes, so here I just really bring the topic back on Unleashed, right? I reel it in because we're talking about specific characters, and I really bring it back to the abstract, right? Because Junger, he really talks about order and chaos first, then being, then abstract religion, and then the characters. So really, before we even get into the characters that they're talking about, we talk about abstract being. So there's very an organized way that Junger writes about this, right? So, I mean, he talks about how, in the original recording, I quoted some words here. So, Martin says, I would do better to start with the night, for my day is its myriad reflection. And that gives us some hints, right, as to this whole order and chaos stuff. And then later on, he says things like, as I already said, like how he has his ethos but not his morals. So all that, which I already mentioned in the recording. But then, he talks about existence and being, right? Being with a capital B, which James will interrupt soon and tell me that is indeed in Heideggerian terms. I don't know when he'll do that, but he will soon. And this is part where he says, consulting the mirror is worthwhile, though purious. It is also a charge.
Yeah. Sorry, just to confirm. Yeah, it's basically a Heideggerian term. It refers to essence, or it's very hard to translate, but yeah, essence is as close as you can get to it. Existence and essence.
There you go. Yeah, so anyways, continuing the quote, it is also a charge, a passage from existence to being. Right? Such issues could, among other things, strengthen the female element, the influence of the moon and sea, of dream and night, of the other side, of pure and simple. So there's really he's talking about being, he's talking about in a very abstract term. He's not pigeonholing it in specific characters yet. That's what I really wanted to emphasize here, right? And he also talks about authenticity a lot, right? Like who is real, because if you, Junger, other people are the chameleons, and there are chameleons and nothing but chameleons. The Anarch is like a chameleon on the outside, which really hides the Anarch on the inside, the authentic Anarch on the inside, who sometimes chills out in his bunker. And, this is noted by how he says, what does he say? I stand before the mirror and view Emanuelo, closing physical appearance, smile, movements must be casual and pleasing. So I remember in the original recording, in the original conversation, I mentioned how this has like very real American Psycho vibes to it, right? Where like you put on an act so much that you forget who you are, right? Dostoevsky would say in The Brothers Karamazov, you lie so much that you start believing in your own lies. And what's really important here is that the Anarch never really does this. Like he is in touch with his own inner truth, and then on the outside to get by, he puts on this act. In any case, yes. So he goes into he goes into order and being. He goes into existence. He goes into order and chaos, and he goes into existence and being, and he talks about very abstract. And the first dips into the little more tangible is when he talks about divinity, right? So he says divinity must without a doubt be inside us and be recognized as being inside us. Otherwise, we would have no concept of gods. And he compares, to really use more tangible examples, he says things like every man has his Sinai and also his Golgotha. So allusions to divine stories. And then once he does all that, that's when he starts getting into the individual characters. So really, the thing that I want to point out, right, is that this chapter might seem all over the place. Oh, he's mentioning introducing 500 different characters at once. Why is he talking about so many different topics about how high society is into fine art? Well, really, it serves a purpose, and not only does it serve the purpose of talking about how people are situated in law and order, it also is presented, organized in a way in which, in which there's a succession to it. So first we talk about order and being in general. We talk about general terms, right? Existentialism being in general terms. We talk about, you know, tangible examples of divinity in general terms, and then we start specifying, narrowing it down to the anarch and all that, right? So yes, that's basically what I wanted to say, and then I concluded by saying, well, I think that the Junger, no, not Junger, Martin the Anarch, he has a very orderly, he has order over order and chaos, right? And I'll get into that later in the recording. So this is basically the first, last, and only time of this episode where I am doing a voiceover retroactively, because right after this conversation I realized that I was self-muting. So yeah, you should be fine there. Now let's see, what is the time now? I think I've exhausted everything that I needed to say. Yeah, so basically, yeah, like I said, it was a monologue. I guess I should go over the table of contents right now. So basically, then now we're gonna get back to the anarchist, the anarcho-nihilist, how and then Dallin and Carnex, I believe, was his name, and the illusion of law and order. So really, this whole chapter is just about what order and chaos is, and what the anarch's relationship to order and chaos is, right? How does the state handle with one's need for order and chaos, right? We see the very chaotic, like Dallin, the anarcho-nihilist. And then we see the last men of society who just want their basic needs to be fulfilled, and that's all they want, right? They're very content with everything. So yeah, that is basically, so we situate it in the terms of different characters, and then we expand a bit and talk about the tertiary characters, such as these would be like the Lebanese, the Chinese. I believe Kang or Kung was the name. Yeah, I forgot the Lebanese's name, right? But basically there's all these different people, and it seems that even with their diverse background, with their diverse heritage, all that has been withered away, smoothed out, and they've all become the last man in one way or another, which really goes to show the fate of civilization.
Yeah. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit.
There you go. He's back.
Start
I'm
there.
gone.
I went straight to the characters, but yeah, I think part of the reason is that just discussions about being, right, particularly capital B being, right, the Heideggerian being, are just, they're intense, even outside of a piece of literature, right, where it's very difficult to tell what exactly is being said. I mean, Heideggerian philosophy is famously complex and difficult. I mean, the definition of being is literally something like the being of a being within being. So it's and all three of those are spelt differently in German, and we've kept different B's in English. But so it's very, very difficult to unpack and untangle. And yeah, like I said, every single almost sentence in that first part could deserve its own talk. Yes, I think one of the key sentences there was primal image is image and mirror image. Now I stuck like 5 question marks after that in my notes here, because that's a powerful sentence, like a really powerful sentence. I would need a lot more time to sort of ruminate on that and just let it soak in, because that's, like, he talks about Christ Christ in the Christ's resurrection as image and primal image, and himself in front of the mirror, right, as image and primal image, because of course there's Martin and there's Emmanuel, right? So he puts on the mask, like you said, kind of in an American Psycho fashion. He puts on the mask of Emmanuel before he goes to the night bar in the Kashba where he serves the condor. So he practices his smile. He disciplines himself. He doesn't drink at all. He won't even drink a glass of water while he's working. So this is, in a sense, this is his mirror image, right? This is not him, but it's part of him. And perhaps what Jünger is saying is that the real image is that mirror image and, of course, the real Martin. And both of them together give a truth that's greater than either one of them. And you could put that onto so many things, right? Because taking it back to Christ, right? I mean, you have the resurrection, you have Christ the man, you have Christ the Son of God, and you have Christ the symbol of the church, and you have all these different images and mirror images and meta images and sub images. And then, of course, that sentence again, primal image is image and mirror image. Now, what's a primal image, right? I don't know. Does he mean the eternal image, right? The force that gives birth to all the reflections and all the realities? Is this sort of like a plate? It even mentions later on Bruno had the idea of reducing the Platonic idea to phenomenon. That's another sentence that I just I would love to have explained. I wish Jünger was here to sort of go over that, because is he trying to say that the primal image is kind of like Plato's forms? It's like this perfect image out there of which everything else is just kind of a faded copy, or in some attempt to imitate. So being and this idea of primal image, and I mentioned, I think in the first part of these discussions, that mirrors and reflections would feature a lot, and they certainly do in this chapter. They come up a lot, ideas of reflections and looking in the mirror and fading into dream worlds and cities of the sun and cities of the moon and nighttime and dreams and time and reflection and mirrors, and all these things are just swirling around in this chapter. And unfortunately, it would take a smarter man than I to untangle them all and make sense of it. So I really would love to go more in detail into it, but it's almost so difficult that I kind of just have to pass on by a little.
Yeah, just sort of pass on by and try to grasp it as best as you can as you go on with the plot line, right? I feel ya.
Yeah, I would love to come back to. I'm definitely going to come back to this chapter a little on my own time and try and go through it a bit more. But some of the stuff there, I feel, is just beyond me at this point.
Well, I mean, lucky you. Like, people like Dalen, and who's the lawyer again? Crap. Oh man, I can't hold my
His name's
microphone.
Prince.
Yeah. Dalen and who?
I believe his name is Carnex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyways, like people like Dalen and Carnex, right? He's a lot more explicitly fleshed out. He's less of an abstract character. It's not like being, right? So that's a good thing. So speaking of Dalen, right? Like, yeah, I think you mentioned in the on air. I think it was off air and on air. You mentioned this whole aspect of crime and punishment, right? And yeah, he kind of resembles a Raskolnikov almost. This Dayton, he is mentioned as a anarcho-nihilist, right? So not only is he an anarchist, but he's also a nihilist. So, and there is a distinction between them, as Jünger points out, right? The anarchist, the actual insurrection, that's just a phase, that's a transition. It's like a means to an end, right? Means you insurrect to bring down the state, whereas the anarcho-nihilist, they insurrect. So he is chaos incarnate, right? And okay, it just popped in my mind. whew, you know how Martin is always like he always mentions how he's on his toes when talking to Dayton, right? He's always be careful. He's always careful when talking to Dalian, just so that he himself doesn't get any trouble. But he nevertheless never stops. He nevertheless refuses to stop communicating with Dayton. Right? He never ignores Dayton altogether. What if that's the metaphor? That's a fancy way of Junger saying that we have to put one foot in the danger zone and not get consumed by it. I don't know. It's just something that I thought of. So might not be true, might not be coherent, but wouldn't be surprised if I was right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. He never rats him out, right? He could have went to the Dome or whatever and said, "Hey, this Dylan guy is no good. He's probably up to something. Have him arrested." But he never does that. Part of it is just, I think, practical concerns. He doesn't want to trace back to himself in any way, because don't forget he's also out in the same place doing his anarch things. That's where he has his forest flight bunker or hut, or basically his escape shack. And I'm sure he doesn't want the Dome or whatever lurking around there, or his men lurking around there. So there's some practical concerns, but yeah, I think you're right that he never says to him, go away, go work for somebody else, because I believe Dallin is one of his stewards. He sort of does work for him, presumably in the Kashba. But yeah, it's a good point. There might be something more there that I didn't think of.
I mean, considering how almost close yet different portrays the difference between the anarch and the anarchist, it definitely wouldn't be too much of a leap to say that the anarch needs to put one step into anarchy and then almost leap from that beyond it. So to say you might need to take a step in the danger zone could definitely be correct. But with how... I remember in the first chapter you were talking about how you couldn't really imagine Martin as an anarchist. So...
Yeah, he's too well grounded in history for that. No, it's okay. He's too well grounded in history for that to sort of be an anarchist. But I do think that, yeah, he's definitely, whether he admits it or not, he's definitely interested and attracted to these kind of people, right? And they're attracted to him. He kind of talks about how they sniff neutral ground, right? And I don't know if you ever experienced this in real life, but I certainly have, where if you're just sort of detached from things, you do get often strange characters sort of gravitate towards you. They do sort of smell a whiff of, here's someone who's not gonna judge me or rat me out or anything like that. This is definitely something I've experienced in real life. So and you do have to be careful, because strange characters are usually strange for a reason. But
Yeah.
yes, talking about the anarchist, I do think that don't forget his Martin's profession is historian, and he does like to listen to such people. He learned a lot from Dallin, he says. He learned a lot from... He even went to the case. He went to the courtroom where Carnex, who killed Dallin, was tried. He gets around a lot, Martin, it seems. But yeah, he's definitely interested in such things, so it makes sense that to a certain extent he'd want to keep this person around and listen to him. Real quick, I forgot to mention earlier on, was that I think it was mentioned at the step, which is that Martin prays. I thought that was very interesting. He kind of prays even though he doesn't believe in gods. He says the gods have left. Just as a little side note, I found that very interesting. It's kind of like this guy who's almost praying for the gods to return in a way. He kind of treats it as a spiritual exercise, like just as he exercises in the morning, he kind of uses that as a kind of spiritual exercise. Very interesting.
I mean, I think there could be two sides to that. The first, he says that this sort of praying is, an innate instinct that is no weaker than the sexual drive, in fact, even stronger. So there's definitely, I think, one side of the coin is that praying is an innate thing that Martin, he wants to submit himself to because he thinks it's bad not to. I think the other side of the coin is that it's mentioned in the first paragraph of the whole novel. It's briefly mentioned in this chapter that creation must have started with, a hoax, a failure. Otherwise, we could not have everything else. So maybe he is praying for the gods to return and fix creation. I think that's definitely a good point you put up there.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Actually, it ties in again to what we're talking about with chaos and order, right? He's almost praying for the return of some kind of eternal divine order, right? And it kind of ties in with his character overall that he's participating in something that he doesn't fully believe in, but he's kind of doing it for very complex reasons, right? Just like with obeying the orders of the Condor and working for the Condor and obeying the Dawn while not believing in them. In some sense, at first glance, if you do it all, he's just a hypocrite. Then you saw a lot of this in the 60s and 70s. You saw a lot of these sort of phony religions that were just sort of believe in a God because I don't know, it made them feel better or something. I see that to this day, and I don't think that's going on here. I think there is more in what Jünger saying here, in the Anarch and in his relationship to spirituality and power. There is again a kind of energy he's still very gently tapping into, because that's the best you can do at this point. Yeah, again, it's a person waiting and wishing for something worth believing in. I believe that was mentioned in the chapter. And sort of, it does tie in very closely to his relationship to God. He respects it, or it as a sort of doesn't necessarily respect it. Or at least he demands that it's worth respecting, basically.
I mean, speaking of power, right? It's definitely interesting how, I mean, you could say Dalin has his own set of powers. You could say how Manuel warns Dalin, or tries to warn him, that he's gonna be destroyed by his own set of powers, or by his application of his powers, yeah? And there is a subtle message there, right? Like a subtle more of the story kind of there, where he's trying to point out that, yeah, like, sure, I am aware of power, but I don't worship it, and I don't let it consume me, right? I'm always keeping everything, right? Not just power, but everything at a safe distance and in controlled amounts. One good example is, he mentions, and this is to me very profound, he mentions that freedom is not his goal, it is his property, right? So it's not something, power and freedom and all that, it's not something that he's like enraptured by, right? It's not something that he's obsessed over. It's something that he has, and it's he mastered over it. Unlike so I guess someone like Dalin is a counterpart to that. And I guess I keep tell me again who the lawyer was. Carnex, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Someone like Carnex is also someone like Carnex to me is almost like just a sophisticated form of Dalin, in that he too got over obsessed and over enraptured by his own powers. So there's definitely again, bringing it back to chaos and order, right? So where do you stand between order and chaos? Is it are you standing it? Do you have order? Can you establish order over the relationship between order and chaos? I guess that's the crux of the thing here, because some people, they cannot control how order and chaos fluctuates between them. They do not have that order over order and chaos, right? That would be Dalen and Carnix. They know how to control. They know how to use chaos. They know how to use order, but they do not how to control the way it fluctuates. A bit nuanced, but I think you get the point.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. This is one of those just incredibly complex topics of, how do you, because I'm sure to a certain extent, even the Anarch recognizes that too much order would stifle freedom. And we're sounding a little bit like basic liberals here, but I mean, that's what makes this topic so complex, is that there is definitely, you sort of have to accept chaos and order as these just forces that are just good. They're just like Dahlen is. I mean, Martin worries a little bit about Dahlen, but he recognizes in the end that this guy's going to destroy himself, right? And that's what chaos ultimately does. You shouldn't worry too much about it. It comes, it goes, it wrecks a few things, but of course it can also spin off into complete destruction, right? And that's where someone like the Domo is very careful to step in. And I'm sure, and that's of course when the forest flight comes in, right, for the Anarch. That's when he flees to his safe shack. So it's, in a way, yeah, the Anarch is sort of reacting to this, right? Too much order, and maybe he would fly to his shack as well, right? I mean, if Eumeswil became some kind of 1984 state, maybe Martin would flee to the forest or find some other way to survive. Maybe flee to the sea or something. But of course, too much chaos, and he has to do the same thing. So this is just this eternal question of chaos and order and the political systems that come out of them, and how do you survive in them. And I don't believe that there is a sort of a golden mean, right, where you sort of get this perfect level of chaos and order and then you have a perfect society. I don't think that's true. I think that you're always doing trade-offs and they're always spiraling off into each other. And the Anarch kind of recognizes that and tries to walk the line and play life like a game, right? I think that was mentioned in one of the earlier chapters, that you sort of have to play this life as a kind of game. You kind of have to be always aware of what's happening, both in the past and the present. You got to be aware of power. You got to be aware of metaphysical truths that can give you clues to the future, and of course all these characters, right? I mean, Martin wouldn't be. He probably would have been caught or whatever a long time ago, or fired or whatever, if he didn't have this understanding of these characters. Like, he immediately senses the air that comes off of someone like Dahlen, right? He can sense immediately, okay, this guy is an anarchist nihilist, right? He gets it very quick. He can understand the Domo, he can understand the Condor, he can understand Carnix, he can understand all these people very, very quickly. And then immediately he can formulate a plan and be like, okay, this guy is not a threat, or this guy is a threat. Let's stay away from him. And so he's able to thrive, in a sense.
Yeah, it's definitely... So maybe it's not correct of me to say, he definitely has a handle over order and chaos. He has order over order and chaos. Maybe it's better to say he can respond so well to order and chaos, right? Which is order in a sense, but it's a very adaptive one, right? It's a very reflexive one. It's not, order has connotations of being rigid, right? Being standardized. No. Like, the Anarch is always fluid, right? You could almost say the Anarch isn't a person, but I mean, I don't want to put a worse side of it here, but like a mode of being. It's something that you tap into, which James, you said, right? I want to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then when you can't do that, then that's when you're consumed by the chaos, right? And what's interesting about being consumed by this chaos, which is what happened to Dahlen, is that Manuel brings up Raskolnikov, right? And his explanation is Raskolnikov, a character in a novel by a Russian author named Dostoevsky, his problem was power. A man who proves he can shed blood has thereby ordained himself in the first holy orders. And what's interesting about Raskolnikov is Raskolnikov's downfall was his conscience, right? It wasn't his punishment was his conscience, because the authorities his conscience got to him first before the authorities did. Whereas that's not the case with Dadin, right? Dadin Dadin, he was never unfazed by his actions, right? He was never troubled by it, consciously troubled by it. So you could almost say Dadin is like what Raskolnikov wanted to be, right? So maybe in a funny way, he is Jünger is pointing out that, bro, if you go down this path, it's damned if you do, damned if you won't, because if you do these chaotic things, right? If your conscience doesn't get to you, then other people will, right? Even if you are consciously invincible, you are not invincible to the physical capacities of other people in which you inflict chaos upon. So I think that was an interesting little tangent where, because when you try to create chaos, you are interfering the order of other people. And when that happens, then the chaos is going to rebound back at you.
Yeah, just one footnote to that is that there's that great line, which I know that a certain Curtis Yarvin has ripped off, which is that I can't find it in my notes, but I think I remember it in my head, that it's basically that opposition is collaboration, right? If you're out there, I mean, we saw this, right? We saw this week, right? This entire month of present year, where if you oppose a regime and you fail to destroy it, then you've essentially strengthened that regime, right? Because someone like Dalin, who he wasn't doing too much, but let's exaggerate and say for a minute that he was bombing post offices or something. He's basically just justifying the Condor's rule and the Domo, right? Because they're there to protect the people. And if you're just causing random fires, or as the two, we haven't mentioned them yet, but there's two criminals mentioned in this who essentially are sort of Jack the Ripper figures. They attack women and basically, well, they do very nasty things to them, and including killing them. And they're kind of just classic criminal types. They're a bit less intelligent than someone like Dalin. They're not necessarily nihilists. They're another archetype, sort of just the serial killer, the serial criminal, we'll just call them. A very classic human figure. And they also justify the system. They justify the Condor. They justify the order, because they're not gonna. They destroy, and thus they are in sense justifying power. So someone like Dalin does that too, right? I mean, no sane person is gonna want to live in a world in which characters like Dalin have power, or their vision of the world. So they strengthen power, and we saw this, of course. This week, or this month, I should say, which is January 2021, sorry. And yeah, I'll say no more on that.
And what's interesting is you mentioned so many different contradictions between criminals like I think his name was Salvatore, the serial killer that you mentioned, the Jack the Ripper type. I believe his name was Salvatore.
Yeah, Salvatore, maybe Salvatore.
Yeah, Salvatore. And you mentioned a lot of differences with him and Carnix, right? Or him and
Dalin.
Yes. But I want to talk about Carnix and Salvatore, and I'll tell you why. You mentioned a lot of different similarities to it, but then I think there is a symbolic element in the fact that they were executed on the same day by the same person. So, like smart man, dumb man, chaos is chaos, tread carefully. That's the kind of message that I got, at least from reading it.
Yeah, there was also some ideas about how justice works in Eumeswil, which was very interesting. They didn't want to seem, because the obvious choice, right, is to let Carnex, the lawyer, off. I'll give some context here real quick. Apparently, there's only like one execution done in Eumeswil every year, and very rarely are executions carried out. They're normally changed to banishment to the islands, which hopefully we'll get to at some point. But that doesn't happen. Carnex, the rich lawyer, is actually executed, and the serial killer Salvatore is banished to the islands, and that's very interesting for a couple of reasons. The Domo, it seems, actually appreciates someone like Salvatore more than Carnex. This is very human. I think people really enjoy, evil criminals. God knows why. We see this with women. It's even mentioned in the book already, where Salvatore was in prison. A rich governess paid to see him for several hours. I think we can imagine what happened in that cell. And she's already trying to join him on the island. I forget his name. Who's the guy in real life who has the swastika carved into his head, and he's like a vicious serial killer?
Charles Manson.
Charles Manson, yeah, and he, my God, women flock for him, and people make movies about him and books about him, and yeah. So again, for some reason, he is. I think Junger's just pointing out something that's maybe a bit more obvious now, but certainly when this book was written, was less well known. But yeah, I mean, Carnex is executed. Salvatore is sent to the islands. And again, this is done so as not to tread on any ideas about class, right? You don't want people getting the idea that the state is favoring the wealthy over the poor. Very interesting notions about modern justice there. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Carnex should not have been executed. Maybe he shouldn't have used a bomb to blow up someone who was just stealing his briefcases, but
Yeah.
it's certainly a lot less severe than a serial killer rapist like Salvatore was. But yeah, just interesting. And maybe that can take us into a little mention about sort of the state as a functional state, because there's some interesting points here. Just real quick, it's sort of mentioned that when the Condor came back to power, he allowed for the panning for gold and salt, two things that was outlawed under the tribunes being the previous rulers of Eumeswil, who seemed to be a stand-in for a sort of semi-democratic liberal society. They sort of regulate everything to an absurd amount, and in their attempt to do good, right, they banned salt panning and gold panning because they thought, okay, the state will just suck this up, and the state will just do the mining for it and then hand it out to people. But this just kind of breeds resentment. And you have a great line where it says in the book that I think it's a little generosity goes a long way for power, which is very true, and that feeds back into what I was talking about with the justice system there. And the Domo in general, it's a very interesting way of sort of dealing out justice. And this goes from the very top to the very bottom. It's not overly rigid. It kind of takes into account larger themes and larger ideas, right? So executing Carnex, like we said, was done so as not to tread on any ideas about class. And then bringing back salt and gold panning, so ordinary people can just sort of, try and make their wealth their own way, is another one of those systems. And as I mentioned at the very start of this conversation, the Domo allowing people to steal from the kitchens as long as it's nothing too big. I think that sort of creates this idea of power in the real world as being very practical, certainly under the Domo anyway, very practical, very... I don't want to use the term liberal. I don't think that really captures it, but it's I'll stick with practical. Yeah, it's very practical. It's very can't think of a word. Just have to go with practical.
You want to know what I think of this whole thing?
Sure.
I don't think this is a matter of being practical. I think this is a matter of playing your cards right with the public opinion. You work in the castle and you steal some food where there's no public, like he doesn't care, right? But you have to realize that law and order are very different things. They're always talked about in the same sentence, in the same phrase, but they're different. Because law is a human invention. Order is not. Well, order is conceived by humans, right? It's conceptualized by humans, but I mean, if you wanted to, you could say that it's orderly with or without humans. But without humans, there is no such thing as law. At least in the law police sense, right? If you say like law of the jungle, then it's different. But anyways, and we could tell, like Jünger mentions like this whole talk about equalization in the cult of collective ideas do not exclude the power of the individual. Quite the opposite. Here's the important part. He concentrates the wishful thinking of millions like the focal point of a concave mirror. He becomes their mime, their tragedian. His theater is the world. Okay, boom. That's what really led me to think that the reason why he does not care if people steal in the little kitchen is because public opinion isn't going to be swayed. But then if you kill the rich man along with the poor man, then there is the illusion, right? There's the illusion of equality and safety. So that is basically what this whole thing was about is law and order wasn't established for the purpose of establishing law and order. It was established for the purpose of establishing the illusion of law and order, to tell the last men of society who would much rather want their chimney smoking than their house smoking that everything is all right, that we got this, man. We have a handle on this. Everything is under control. We have it under control, so therefore you don't have to, right? We take care of this for you, so you don't have to take care of yourselves. And slowly, whether you know it or not, you are under our control. Again, that's how I see it, right? How law and order isn't there to make a safe, legal society. I mean, like, just talk about their whole tangent on abortion, right? Like, they don't really care about, like, they do, but they don't. Where he says that in Eumeswil, abortion is punishable but not persecuted. Well, what I got from that is, like, they have to pay lip service to things that people think is wrong, right? They have to please the crowd when executing prisoners. They have to show the world, hey, we still have justice. Our scale is still balanced, and so don't worry. The scale isn't tipped. We got this under control. So I think it's a play on deceiving the masses. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think the word I may have been looking for was symbolic, right? They sort of understand the symbolic relationship between justice and law, and power and law, and all these things. And it's part of the reason why they pay in gold, right? That was one of the first things the Condor did. You gotta make sure that people understand where power actually is, and the symbolic relationship between something like gold and money and something like law and justice. There's a lot going on there, and the Domo gets it, right? The Domo gets that. The Condor gets it, and yeah, that comes up a lot in this chapter.
I mean, I think it's mentioned in the Deportation Islands that no matter what group of people, no matter crowd of people you sort of freely fling onto an island, they're always going to end up in some sort of despotic or tyrannic rule. So as much as the Domo is trying to keep order, I think it's mostly in the self-interest of the Domo, of the Condor, of Attila, in trying to keep that power lasting for the 30 years or more that it can at most be expected to in Eumeswil.
And yeah, and about that, right? So just to add on to what you said, there is definitely a almost fakery to what's happening. Such are the standards in Eumeswil, a fellow society that periodically suffers moral harassment from demagogues. That was basically my entire point, right? About those in power redefining what law and order is. Therefore, they can use that revised definition to please the crowd, right? So, a fellow society that periodically suffers moral harassment from demagogues. Check this out. Until generals come and insert an artificial spine. So this is like the crux, man. The whole central theme of what Jünger is talking about when he talks about freedom is if you are freed by others, you have no freedom. You don't have freedom. You have permission, right? If someone gives you rights are not rights. Rights are freedoms. And you have those rights until they cannot give it to you. So if you give yourself freedom, then you are free. But if they give it to you, then you are not free. You have permission. And again, that has to do again with order and chaos, right? Where do you stand on that, right? Do you? Well, I mean, it's a very order and chaos in a very weird sense because when someone gives you rights, you don't have to go through chaos to get it, right? So you don't have to go through chaos to get to that state of order where you have freedom and security. This is what Jünger means by when he has his own little bunker, right? It's not a comfortable bunker. It's a small bunker. It's probably very uncomfortable. It's probably dark. Not a lot of things to do there, but it's his. It's authentic. It's where he is himself, right? And so he had to go through chaos to get to that solid order, right? Where the last men of society, they did not have to go through chaos to get to that order, but the order is fragile. The order you just need to poke a hole in it and it just goes, the balloon just pops. So, speaking of despotic governments, I think that's some food for thought for sure.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier on, freedom is it's a property of the anarch, right? It's something that you're actually born with. All people have it, but very few sort of recognize that they have it or develop it or find kind of the strength to tap into it. But it is something that you intrinsically have, and it's something that is your own, right? It's your property. It's I think I described it in the first discussion as like a valuable diamond or some great work of art that you have. Sometimes you have to hide it. Sometimes you gotta hide that. But for the most part, you can kind of display it, and you can, if you're careful, and you can draw strength from it always, and that's sort of its purpose. I think there's a line here that he says, kind of maybe a response to Nietzsche, where he says, if history does have an overall theme, then it's probably freedom and not will, which is interesting. Perhaps correct. Maybe that is the theme of history, is freedom in some sense. Freedom in all its different facets and forms. Will just sort of being the second stage of that. How you act on that freedom. But that's my thoughts.
I mean, you just mentioned right then and there, right? Freedom is like how you act, and then Elliot mentioned earlier, like Elliot mentioned how I mentioned in the first meeting how it's very the anarch is very similar in a way to the anarchist, and James was like, oh no, the anarch is way too historically enlightened to take a step in that direction. But I wouldn't be so sure, to be honest, James, because to take it straight from the horse's mouth, right? The guiding thought, the anarch's relationship to the anarchist is simple, despite all the variants. Here's the key. Besides, the distinction is merely one of degree, not of principle. as in everyone, as in all of us, the anarch is also concealed in the anarchist, the latter resembling an archer whose arrow has missed a bullseye. Okay, so James, you were kind of right in that there's no way that the anarch can become the anarchist. But in terms of their differences, I don't think there is a lot, in the sense that the anarchist can become the anarch should he take the effort. So there is that little silver lining of hope, right? That, to use current meme terminology, like to become the bloomer, right? Where, like, you see these you see people like Carnix, he dies. Daleks, he dies. Salvatore, he dies. And he didn't. It's almost like materially he died, but it's almost like, I mean, I don't want to sound like woo woo, but like it's almost as if like only the everything except the anarch died when they were executed, right? It's almost like when you execute them, you are basically killing the part that caused them to die in the first place, which is their anarchy. It's like shedding skin almost.
I guess like you could argue though that in order to sort of understand that point, right? You could take an anarchist and you could say to them, look at what happened to Dalin and look what happened to Carnex and all these people, and but then in a sense you are infusing them with this historical understanding, right? You sort of are having to sort of bring to their attention these sort of historical truths of how these movements always end, which for some reason anarchists just always forget. They talk about the Paris Commune a lot, but they kind of forget how the Paris Commune ended. It ended in an absolutely massive bloodbath. So, and the Spanish Republic, which they also mention, ended in a fascist victory. So it's like, they just seem to forget these parts. So you kind of do have to infuse them, I would say, with this historical understanding and a sense of tragedy, right? About human nature. Again, going back to the very first page, creation was born with a oh god, what did he say again? Creation was born with a
hoax, fraud, what have you.
A hoax, fraud. Yeah, a fraud. And yes, so I do think that if you have that, like if you could show that first page to an anarchist, I do think they could become an anarch. But something that draws people to be anarchists is a little bit they have a little bit of the Dalin in them. They have a little bit of the chaos. They have a little bit of the desire to see things burn. Or some of them are just hopelessly do-gooders. I think it's even mentioned in this book that more harm has been done by the do-gooders than by strictly evil people than in history. I mean, again, look at Dalin, right? I mean, or a Raskolnikov, or even like a Stavrogan from another Dostoevsky novel. These people are usually pure evil, but they don't do the groundwork for them, and the real harm is usually done by people with the best intentions. But that's a different topic.
Yeah, well, that is a different topic, but the thing that you were saying just before that was right on topic with what I wanted to transition to now that we're past the 1 hour mark. It is how you mentioned the tragedy of creation and how we're all destined to go one direction, or most of us is destined to go one direction, and how it is a very, almost a tragedy. And that just reminded me of what Elliot said off of air, because reading through the a chapter with all the multi-ethnic people, I'm just like, well, I guess that's just how it is, I guess it's just very multi-ethnic, right? You got the Lebanese, the Chinese, the Korean, the Inuit. Martin he's I don't know, he's probably white. He says he was suntanned, so, and so I guess I guess he's probably white, I guess. Anyways, yeah.
I think he's supposed to be Mediterranean. They just sort of say.
Yeah, there you go.
That's big enough.
And then I didn't think anything else. It's multi-ethnicity. And then Elliot said something. Then I want him to mention it himself because I think it's very great, but great, very deep and profound. But it just really ties into what you said, James, about how the tragedy of creation is we're all going towards one direction. So take it away, Elliot.
Yeah, so to reiterate, in this novel we have Kung, Chinese cook, Lebanese called named Nabek, his wife, who is Korean, and then also it mentions that the Condor himself was South American as well. So we have 3 different continents there. We have sort of Asia, we have South America, and we have a lot of sort of European history, and we can sort of infer from that.
Yeah, and the Inuit is North American, right? And then, yeah, you mentioned Asia, South America, Africa. I mean, they're in Africa, so.
So I just sort of took it as a sort of amalgamation of all these different people who have moved past sort of racial bias that said in the first chapter that people don't really judge by race anymore. That's just beyond them. But all these different people coming into this sort of chaotic and meaningless society I mentioned last time, it sort of infers that every country, every person with time is going to be that Nietzschean idea of the last man.
Yeah, I think I said off air that they haven't overcome racial differences. They have just, in a sense, all sunk down into one grey mass of people. They haven't transcended any of these things. They've just fallen back into kind of a primitive state of no real difference. And part of the reason why Eumeswil has to be ruled the way it is, why it constantly shifts between dictators and tyrants and semi-democratic institutions, and why a lot of the things are the way they are, is because the people of Eumeswil are just this very rootless mob of people that just basically have to be ruled, they have to be controlled, and they have to be distracted with. That's part of the reason why crime is tolerated, not cracked down too much. Crime provides a nice distraction, nice fascination, and gambling and prostitution and even the occasional coup. All these things are just necessary to keep some semblance of life going in Eumeswil. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's a good contrast between, sort of as I put it, the meaningless people of Eumeswil, but in there have to be some people with meaning to actually make it look like a society, to make it actually have order and that remnants of the time before, really.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why a lot of these characters stick out probably so much in Eumeswil. Your Vigos, your Brunos, your Salvatores, your Dalins, your all these characters, because I mean they're essentially against a very grey backdrop. Even someone like Martin, who doesn't, I mean, he's an intelligent guy, doesn't, but I mean he must stick out quite a bit. He must have to work very hard to hide it against the backdrop of what Eumeswil is.
And you know, isn't that something, right? Where, I mean, like, every distinct culture, every civilization, right? Every culture is, you know, they have their own history, their ups and downs, their defeats and victories, their accomplishments, their failures, their however you define failure, I guess. Like every culture has that distinction. And it seems like Jünger is pointing out, like there is no culture that can withstand the human propensity to become the last man, right? If you have the right conditions, which are conditions that we may live in, a very pacified society a society pacified by technology. No real purpose in life, all that jazz that you hear in like bi-motivational groups, so I don't have to repeat it. But the point is, there is this subtle tragedy that's inferred here about the state of mankind, and maybe it is a mistake to see it as a tragedy, right? Maybe it is a mistake to see it as a tragedy. For one, the anarch doesn't seem to be too bothered by this, and maybe that's because people who complain about such how do you say uneventful cultural outcomes like the one in Eumeswil, they have not transcended time. They have not transcended history, because you have to remember the anarch is someone that transcends time, and one good way to mention this is, above all, the anarch must not think progressively. Which is not only to say the anarch must not think like a progressive, right, like progressivism, but he must also not think linearly, right, because progression implies linear, if not like it might resemble like a jagged up and down process, but ultimately it resembles a point A to point B, and I guess when we think of it like that, the state of Eumeswil, with all its grayness, is a tragedy, but really the anarch doesn't seem too unfazed by it. So, again, going back to order and chaos, maybe it's not that he is... So first I said he has an order over order and chaos. Maybe that's not it. And then I said maybe he is super well adapted to order and chaos, and maybe that's sort of it. But reading through his whole, thinking on what Idiot said on the fate of all civilizations, and the decline of the human spirit and all that, I think the anarch's relationship to order and chaos is it's almost like he transcended it, where order and chaos becomes one. He talks about things becoming one for some time, like here and there, right? He talks about like time and space merging into the absolute, or like whatever that means. So I think he transcended order and chaos, which includes transcending time, which includes not really being blackpilled by the state of Eumeswil.
Yeah, there is some hints towards the end of this chapter, and towards the end of this novel, as we sort of wind this whole book, is there's hints about technology possibly transforming into something else. I'm not sure what. It's very vague, as some of the aspects in this novel are. I still don't fully understand what the Luminar is, for example. It seems to be some kind of... I mentioned this last time, but it seems to be some kind of giant room where... I believe it's mentioned... the word conjure is used, like to conjure up something. It seems to be some sort of room where you can conjure up historical people to talk to, and literally partake in history, kind of like the holodeck in Star Trek. I think I mentioned that. But it's interesting that Martin's father sort of poo-poos this room. He's like, that's not real history, because we can never be too certain about these things. But then again, we can never be too certain about historical documents or anything of that kind. So it's definitely worth a shot. And that kind of technology, is extraordinarily interesting, right? It's no longer just quantified numbers. There's something magical in it. You can make historical figures talk to each other, and in a sense, a scientist may look at that and say that's not real, but in a sense, you're sort of allowed to access perhaps higher truths doing that, which is kind of what Martin is doing. He kind of talks about himself as a historian without a system. which is complex in and of itself. Should a historian have a system? But you can't really get at objective facts either, so you kind of have to have a system. So all these complex things, but there is, at least in the novel, in this book, I mean, to a certain extent, it's almost positive, right? I mean, I think I said before that Eumeswil is better than some places in the world today, right? I mean, I wouldn't mind being under the Domo or the Condor. They seem pretty chill. They seem pretty smart, pretty well read, pretty I mean, I can't imagine Joe Biden or whatever riding out on a horse on a hunt. I think I made that joke, but either way, yeah, there is, like you said, the anarch isn't too bothered by all of this, and there does seem to be some hope in it, right? That by technology and history and in some sense like magical realism sort of combining into these strange ways of looking at the world, and possibly by the necessities of power having to resurrect certain concepts, like we talked about gold, economics and in power, and the way, as we mentioned, the Domo rules, lackadaisical rules, it's very old school, very pre-modern. You can get away with stuff if he likes you, and like that do create a sense that maybe this isn't terrible. Maybe this is a transition stage, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe something like Eumeswil and stuff is on the road to something better. The return of the gods.
I think perhaps you're talking
I would be quick to disagree there, but I'll let you finish.
throughout the novel, there's certainly an amount of apathy. There's apathy for the people, sort of about crime and daily lives. They don't really seem to care or do anything. There's an apathy in the sort of crime that takes place, and I think that's also true in very certain respects in Martin and the Anarch. There's sort of Martin mentions saying that a change of authority doesn't do much for an Anarch, it's just a change of flags. So there's definitely an apathy of who has the authority over them. But what they care about is the fact that there is authority over them, because then they can slip in to the authority and have the freedom to not rule themselves for a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm. I just want to put. I understand where you're coming with apathy. I would perhaps change it just to say it's less about apathy and more about not taking this world seriously, right?
There you
take
go.
These systems seriously. But of course, I mean, you can take your own things seriously, right? I mean, what do you call it? Martin takes, his building of his bunker seriously. He takes his job very seriously. He takes his history very seriously. So he's not apathetic about those. He doesn't fall into sort of nihilism or hedonism. He keeps himself disciplined and trained, and all subordinate to his own personal rules. I mean, he's king of himself, right? The king has to look good, and the king has to, do his best for his realm, which is, in this case, just himself. But I understand what you mean by apathy, in that sense that you're sort of apathetic to power or whatever. There is sort of a phase that permeates.
Yeah, who's apathetic with anyone else other than the Anarch. That's all I was quickly disagree there. With that, I get the sentiment, though maybe Anarch isn't the right word, but I get the sentiment behind it. I guess Elliot, maybe like a aloofness would be aloofness is the right word, Would you say that, like some kind of detached, yet very aware relationship to it? Which again, it talks about transcending, right? You've transcended order and chaos.
Aloofness is probably more close to what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get what you were saying. Just a slight change of term, I think, is all we need.
Now, you mentioned things about the Luminar and how he kind of talks to different, historical figures. Yeah. Let me just point out how we're doing for time. 5 seconds.
The Luminar is definitely very interesting. I really wish he went more into detail to it because I couldn't find it on my reread there. Maybe I missed it because it was reading it fast. But he sort of I think I remember describing how you use it, being like waving a conductor's baton and summoning these images of people in an almost musical fashion, like a conductor. I love that idea. It sort of ties in with this this idea of technology perhaps moving in more healthy directions, right? I mean, instead of just sitting at a keyboard, hunched over, pushing buttons. And it mentions keyboards in this novel, which is interesting. 1977 again. Very, I don't know, didn't know they had keyboards then, I guess. But, yeah, active in that. You see, it seems to be, you sort of have to have a skill to use it.
Yeah.
Martin mentions he needs concentration because another character is trying to sort of share his hours. He doesn't want he has to be alone to do this, and it seems very personal and very it doesn't seem like you're just reading a dry text. It seems like you're engaging with history directly, sort of musically bringing it to the forefront, constructing it almost in a way in order to find deeper truths, which I think ties in with a lot of the stuff said in this novel, particularly Bruno and Vigo, who are shown as doing this, right? They don't just repeat what's popular or, regurgitate facts. They kind of play with history and play with reality and try and bring something more. And of course, the Luminar helps with that. And that's a more hopeful view of technology and science. I think. That's one of the reasons why I love this novel.
Yeah, is how's my mic right now? All good?
It's a little bit breaking up.
Alright, can you keep talking and then I'll fix it. Talk about...
Just to mention some of the things from my notes here. I really like the he's talking the Inuit when he's talking about that's interesting little discussion about how they sort of it's a very masculine society. It's very touch and go. They almost rolling against the elements, and kind of like the Anarch, who surrounds himself with power to stay safe from power. Or certainly that's what Martin does. Similarly, the Inuit or the Eskimo, he builds a house of ice to protect himself from the cold. I love that line. It's all these measures are taken against the cold and in houses of ice. So just a little bit there. Quite nice.
How am I down right now? Any better?
It's a bit better, but there's still sort of a crackling noise.
Alright, I mean, I suppose we could end it here. Because... Man, I hope you can hear me. If you can't hear me, that's fine. Because I can just...
We can hear you, it's just like a crackling noise whenever you stop talking.
Oh, I see. When I stop talking.
Yeah, whatever, sort of when you're in between your words. But I think you're right. I think we're sort of pressing up against time here anyway. But
Yeah.
Well, we'll be able to talk more anyway, because I think the next part is very short. There's not too much left for the novel, so we'll be able to bring all this together anyway. I think for hopefully a longer discussion next time.
You know, more importantly, the reason why I wanted to leave this for later is because when the Luminar talks about, I'll have to talk very fast, and if there's a crackle between my words, if there's a lot of, because in the end of this chapter there's a lot of historical context, right? But it's not just a historical context, it's talking about different philosophers. And we agreed that on the last episode we are going to talk about how like the Anarch on its own, right? So we're just going to talk about the Eumeswil as a philosophy, not just from the book. And we're really going to have to bring up Stirner, Nietzsche. He mentions the Übermensch, he mentions the ego. So yeah, definitely there. So really, it does sound like we are cutting it abruptly, but it's a clean cut in my case. In my estimation, it's a clean decapitation.
Yeah, this was a long chapter anyway, so it's probably a good thing that we sort of save some for next week, because there was a lot in here.
Yeah. Is that cool with you, Elliot?
Yep, that's fine.
Alright, gonna stop recording then. So for anyone listening to this, sorry if the voice is crackling. You've probably heard, okay, so by the time I upload it, you probably heard it, but in the first few minutes, you'll hear me with a new voice, and that's because I have a voiceover, because I forgot to record that part. But don't worry, like I said, this time the words are near perfect, because I actually wrote it down beforehand, what I was gonna say. But anyways, see you next time. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.